All right, we're going to close out the day with a panel, and Chris Burroughs is going to be introducing the panel that is coming forth. Chris is the Director of Data and Director of Data and Protection. Boy, Brian, long day. More cookies. Director of Data Protection and Governance with the Commonwealth of Virginia, and she's going to bring up her esteemed panel. So please give Chris a round of applause.
Well, hello, everyone. If you saw the slide before, we're not discussing AI, machine learning. What we're discussing today is how the private and public sector, we can change topics. We're going to discuss how the private and public sector can benefit by working together to solve complex problems and what they can learn from each other. As a bit of housekeeping, I'd like you to leave your questions until the end, but now I'd like to introduce the talented members of our panel. We'll start off with Ken Pfeil, then we have Zaki, I'm going to pronounce your name, Barzinji? That's right. Thank you, and Pamela Marino. Ken is a security and finance industry veteran, formerly serving as VP and Managing Director of Data Protection and Governance at OneMain Financial. Prior to OneMain, he serves as the Chief Security Officer for Tech Democracy, MFS Investments, and before that served as CISO for Pioneer Global Asset Management. Ken's IT and security experience spans over 3 decades, with strategic, technical, and executive experience at companies such as Microsoft, Dell, Capital IQ, Meridian Global Network, Avaya, and Merrill Lynch. Ken co-authored Microsoft's Best Practices for Enterprise Security white papers and participated on the Information Systems Security Association's International Privacy Advisory Board, covering the initial implementation of GLBA. He reported on security risk and performed vulnerability analysis for Windows IT Pro magazine's Security Administrator publication for 4 years, and has been a contributing expert for information security, CIO, and CSO magazine, and is a distinguished fellow of the Ponemon Institute. So I think he knows what he's talking about. So, yeah, okay. Put all the words. There's a lot there. Now, Pamela has a master's degree in public administration and over 20 years of experience working for municipal governments. For the last 15 years, she has worked for the city of Norfolk. Pamela began her career in communications and community outreach. However, though, through an interesting twist of fate, she found herself working in Norfolk's IT department just as they were considering launching an open data program. She was asked if she wanted to lead that effort, and she has never looked back. Now, Pamela is the director of Civic Lab, a department co-located in Norfolk's Department of Budget and Strategic Planning. Civic Lab's mission is twofold. First, providing training, tools, and assistance to city staff to help them make innovative, data-informed decisions. And second, to increase transparency and data literacy in our community. Another great speaker, and then Zaki. He is the Senior Director for Aspen Digital, where he oversees a range of projects at the intersection of tech, policy, equity, and justice for underrepresented communities. Zaki is a public affairs leader with a decade of experience in political campaigns, public service, and policy change at the state and federal level. He served in the White House as Senior Associate Director of Public Engagement and President Obama's liaison to Arab Americans, Muslims, Sikhs, and other minority faiths, where he worked to amplify voices and narratives seldom represented at the highest levels of government. Before joining the White House, Zaki served as Tech Policy Advisor and Deputy Director of Intergovernmental Affairs for Governor Terry McAuliffe, where he helped direct the launch of Virginia's first open data portal and managed Governor McAuliffe's National Cybersecurity Initiative for the National Governors Association. Just prior to joining the Aspen Institute, Zaki worked as head of state and local government affairs for Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, where he partnered with governors and mayors across the country to close the digital divide, modernize tech policy, and leverage emerging technology to rebuild a more resilient and equitable digital infrastructure for all communities in a post-pandemic world. Zach, pretty good, huh? So we've got some really smart people on this panel, so I'm looking forward to a lively discussion. So let's get started. Let's start out talking about the event that impacted all of our lives, the COVID pandemic. So Zaki, I'll start with you. How did the pandemic impact innovation in both the private and the public sector?
That's a good question. First of all, can you guys hear me? Is this working? Oh. Hello?
Did you turn it on?
It's on. I swear it's on. Okay. You guys hear me? Okay. Awesome. First of all, thanks, everybody. It's great to be here. It's been a while since I've been in Richmond, as you heard. I was here several governors ago, but it's nice to be back. As you heard from my bio, I've had the good fortune and maybe misfortune in some cases to have been on all sides of tech, from private sector to in government to right now in the nonprofit kind of think tank space. So, and I also had several of those jobs throughout the pandemic because I like to jump between jobs, as you can tell from my very eclectic resume. I think that most of you know that the pandemic really exposed some pretty critical issues that we have with our digital infrastructure as a country. We saw so many data centers, state-run, city-run, not just here in Virginia, but across the country, fail because all of a sudden you had this surge of users, this surge of people who needed to learn online, work online, access benefits online. And I think there was, and at the same time, a lot of our data centers, different states' data centers were horrendously, hopelessly antiquated. There was data centers that were still running on COBOL. There were, there was not the right infrastructure. There was not the type of resilient resources that we needed as a country to handle a moment like the pandemic. But what has been fascinating to see is how quickly states responded in rebuilding that infrastructure and engaging with the private sector to solve problems. One of the best things to come out of the pandemic is government got a lot more comfortable with taking big risks, which governments don't do. And I think that has been a beautiful lesson. And my biggest worry is that instead of institutionalizing a better appetite for risk within government, we might snap back to our status quo. So I think if there's one big lesson so far, it's been innovation in a time of crisis is always a good opportunity to change the way we do things. But we have to intentionally keep that momentum going so we don't snap back to how things were before.
Oh, that's great, Zaki. And Pamela, did you have some?
Yeah, I would say just from, very hyper-local in the city of Norfolk, you're right, cities are slow to adopt frequently. And this made us much more agile. I mean, before, to get permission to get VPN and work from home, it really took a signature of the city manager. And, our security guys said, can't be done, no way, no way. And we figured it out in about a week, how everybody could work from home. The other thing that changed my life is that we really adopted Laserfiche. So you used to have, in DocuSign, used to have to physically walk around with a document and get people to sign it, to pay for something, and it always got lost, and it just was a lot of angst. And suddenly, we figured out how to sign everything electronically because we had to. So, of course, the pandemic wasn't great in so many ways, and we took a huge hit financially, as all cities did. But now that we're sort of recovering, I have to say that we really did come out much more agile. And one more thing that we had is we had Teams, but nobody had access to it. There was the security guys were playing with it. So that flip got switched, and so that switch got flipped, and then we were all able to access that too. So I would have to say that we were just forced to be more nimble, and that was a good thing.
I think it is a good thing. Go ahead, Ken.
I would add to that make sure that this, okay, there we go. I would add to that in the respect that we've all heard the phrase necessity is the mother of invention, right? Nobody really had a choice. We had to go into this. We had to keep living. We had to keep doing our lives. We had to keep working. We had to keep food on the table, right? But one of the things that I think people seldom thought and seldom looked at was from the cultural perspective and how that impacts folks, right? Not being able to talk to one another directly, things that like old people like me all take for granted, right? I know we were just talking out in the hallway how a lot of people don't even pick up the phone and hear someone else's voice anymore, right? But we'll sit here and we'll do a text back and forth 16 times until 20 minutes later we come to a resolution, right? The good thing about, video conferencing coming of age in all of this was the necessity to actually see someone's face and communicate and collaborate. And you had to develop and innovate ways to collaborate, which I think kind of pushed technology one step further into, better collaboration because it was a necessity.
So pandemic did create a lot of innovation, both in the public and the private sector. It's one of the good sides of what we all went through. So Ken, I'll pose this question to you. I guess what are the biggest challenges facing both private and public sectors in building partnerships, and how can they be overcome?
I think one of the biggest challenges is folks seeing outside their own lens, right? And seeing and trying to understand, how things are done within different sectors. Private sector, I was private sector my entire life, 35 years, whatever. This is my first public sector job. And so coming into this a year ago, and most of the administration is private sector for a good reason. There are a lot of things and a lot of perspectives that you learn in the private sector that translate very well to the public sector. Ideas such as, we try and treat, at least in my agency, we try and treat the other agencies as autonomous business units, right? Just like you would have in, a global corporation or a large corporation where you have autonomous sub companies and other people that are beholden to a kind of a higher power, right? So if you treat them like autonomous business units, they all have individual outcomes that they have to meet. They all have their things that they're trying to do from constituent perspective and a Virginian perspective, and it's how do we approach that, help them meet their goals, and just facilitate better outcomes for everybody. It's not that much different from the private sector, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. For sure. So Zaki, what are your thoughts on the challenges?
So I had the inverse experience where I spent most of my career in government, and then I took a private sector job in 2017 working for Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, which does servers, storage, and connectivity. So basically all the big data centers, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise tries to go for those types of jobs, for those types of deals. But I came in as a government affairs person, and I was told very clearly I would not be doing sales. That was a lie. Very, very quickly after I got into that job, I was asked to sort of support the deal pipeline. And what that taught me is, I had all 50 states under my purview, so I had to go into each state, engage with governor's offices, help them understand kind of the value of our company, but I also would get paired up with whoever the sales rep was in each of those state capitals. And the sales reps were always, justifiably, very focused on, I need to get this deal, I need to hit my quota for this quarter, and that's all I'm going to care about. Whereas my approach was, we need to elevate our company and not be seen as just a vendor, but to be seen as a true partner with these governors and these mayors. And I had to make the business case for why that's how the private sector should pivot in its engagement with states and with cities. And so what we ended up doing was we started ditching our monologues about how great our little boxes were and started focusing more on the true stories behind the technology that we were producing. And we took the time to understand what the top priorities were for each governor's office, for each mayor's office we went into, and adapted our explanation of what we did to match what we knew were their priorities, rather than, again, go in front of them and just sell them a bunch of boxes. And I think I was, in a lot of ways, just sort of, BSing my way through that job, but it was often successful. We often got calls back from governor's offices that had been stonewalling our company for years before because we took this approach of problem solving, of partnership, and not just a transactional vendor relationship. So I think that's sort of the flip side of what private sector can do better when it comes to engaging government.
Great. And your thoughts, Ben?
I would say it's kind of a mashup of both of those. Definitely, from my perspective, just as the pandemic hit, I was trying to push forward an open data portal program, and nobody wanted that. Everybody thought it was going to be a problem, and I don't have the power to force everybody to do stuff. So I had to show them how it was going to be a win-win. And I think that's sort of what happens in private sector. Any sort of book that you read about making a deal, you show the people that it's going to help them. So we had to show them how it was going to, making this data, putting it in a portal was going to help not only the public, because you weren't going to get so many FOIA requests, but we showed a lot of times how folks, it would help internally. You know, we'd have these meetings and somebody would say, oh my gosh, I've been trying to get that data forever for my job. So I really think that we're all humans. And in the end, we want our jobs to be easier and to make sense. And so I don't think there's a big difference between public and private.
Actually, Pamela, if you can maybe explain what an open data portal is for some of the folks in the audience who maybe are not familiar with it.
Okay, an open data portal is basically, it's kind of like a website inside a website where you can go and we make public data sets that are kept throughout the city. It definitely goes through a vetting process. We're not just throwing data sets up there willy-nilly. We're making sure that we're not putting in any PII out there. But it's a wide variety of data sets. We started off sort of doing what we thought would be easy, and then we started doing working with the FOIA office to find out what people are looking for. So as diverse as, well, one of the most popular ones is employee salaries. You can look up everybody's salary and find out what they make without names. You can, let's see, we have all the calls to our 311 center, and you can sort it by what the complaints are. We have arrest records, we have warrants, parking tickets. So we have about 50 data sets, and it's just anything you can think of that a municipality does, we have that data in the portal. Mm-hmm. And it's open, and there's an API, so you can download the data for your own use or put it in an Excel file and manipulate it, whatever you want to do.
Well, thank you. Mm-hmm.
Well,
Ken knows too.
Sorry. As far as my office, the Office of Data Governance and Analytics, or ODGA, as we do for short, we have, I guess, two primary portals or two primary data sharing mechanisms. One is the Commonwealth Data Trust, which is internal only, executive branch agencies, localities, and things of that nature. And what that is secure data sharing between agencies. By way of a universal entity index, where we have 8.6 million Virginians de-identified and assigned to GUID and things of that nature. The other side of the house is open data portal for us as well. And that's more from a transparency perspective. So we've got enabling outcomes at the agency level from our own internal perspective, and helping them solve very specific problems that are legitimately inherent to their agency, or helping them provide better services through the use of proper data analytics and the right amount of data to make that decision, to make that outcome. And then we have a transparency part of the open data portal, which we work very well with Norfolk and a few other localities as well, and we'll pick up some of their data, publish it through the Commonwealth data portal. So if you go to data.virginia.gov, you'll hit the open data portal.
We were the first data set to be federated onto
And
just saying.
And just to round out the story, when I joined Governor McAuliffe's administration, there was no open data portal. And also, Governor McAuliffe, I was on his campaign after he won. He just told a bunch of us, yeah, just be in our policy office. And they're like, what do you want us to do, Governor? He's like, you guys figure it out. Which is probably not the best way to govern, but anyway. So I chose tech policy as my portfolio because nobody else knew what that meant. I knew that it would allow me to have my hands in every single thing the Commonwealth was doing, every single thing the governor was doing, and I pushed for us to prioritize open data and an open data portal. And it took a long time to get agencies to submit the initial data sets. And I think in some ways things haven't changed in many years. And that's also where we ended up having the idea of doing a hackathon between agencies to get agencies to actually see the value of sharing data with each other. We originally were going to call it Hack Virginia, then we were told we couldn't use the word hack, and that's how it became a datathon instead, which I was very sad about. But that's, it shows you like how important and how hard it is to demonstrate the value of data sharing. and the value, especially of open data, because we're taught sort of instinctively to keep data protected as much as possible. And so it's like the opposite. You have to flip your mindset altogether to say, I'm actually going to make this data publicly available as much as possible. And then the only way to demonstrate that to some folks is to actually build stuff with that data so you can see firsthand, this is how this data can be used to help improve the lives of citizens. And that's also where the private sector comes in, because the private sector can take that data, build cool apps, build cool services that then demonstrate the value of sharing that data.
Yep.
And just a plug for the Commonwealth Datathon. It kicks off April 11th. We're closing registration very soon. Right now we've got, I think, 16 or 18 teams that have signed up and registered. The theme is maternal mortality and essentially reducing maternal mortality. So we have all the data to back that up, and just sign up and help us find some legitimately great outcomes that we can take up through the administration and say, you know what? It'd be really great if we worked on this and worked towards this objective.
By the way, can I still own the Data.Virginia Twitter account? This is probably a good time to tell you that I can hand over the keys to that if you'd like.
The Datathon is a lot of fun, and also it's a great team builder. If you pull together people from throughout your organization, you really sort of interact in a way that you never would in another time. So I recommend it.
And visit the open data portals. So
Yes.
Enough with the marketing.
Okay.
We're doing good here. Okay. So let me start off with Ken. So how can the public agencies leverage the expertise and resources of the private sector to improve the public services and programs? I think you touched on a few things here, but if we can get a little deeper on that.
Yeah, I would say, obviously, events like this, and my apologies for not getting here early enough in the day. It really looked like a great agenda, but somebody had me in a headlock back up at the Patrick Henry building for most of the day. But events like this are phenomenally great to understand, what's being solved for in the private sector and getting out of the house, so to speak, right? We all know, our own jobs on a day-to-day basis, and we know what, in the private sector, we know what our companies are looking to solve for. It's a question of how does that correlate with company B, and are they looking to solve the same problems? Are they looking at the same type of outcomes? Are they looking at the same types of data? What's the solution that we should be working on cohesively? What groups would facilitate that type of thinking and talking together and things of that nature? Vendors are another thing. Don't think I just, every time you call, I yell at you. Although it's probably closer to the truth, but for the most part, we really wanting to know what is going on out there outside of our own little purview. And so if I seem a little gruff, if you're calling me at 6 o'clock in the morning for the third day straight, then you know why.
All right, and Pamela, any thoughts on how?
The only, I really am so hyper-focused on municipalities, but I will say that when we first started the Open Data Portal, we formed an advisory committee. We had some internal committees, which I might get a chance to talk about later, that got it off the ground, but we had an advisory committee of some elected officials and also some business leaders in the community, really to show support for what we were doing and to educate them about what an open data portal was and get ideas about what they would like, what data sets they would like. So.
All right, and Zaki, now I'll ask you, what can the private sector learn from the public sector in terms of like organizational structure, governance, risk management, and so forth?
Yeah, and I can also answer both questions. I think, when government does tech and data right, it takes a citizen-centered approach. In other words, the services, the products that are created by government should have the end user, which is the citizen, in mind every step of the way. And there should be an inclusive product design process that takes place within government in which constituents, citizens are included in every step of the design process for any new product that comes out of it. The same goes for policy too. Policy making ideally should be a citizen-centered process, but that's another story. I think that the private sector can learn from that approach. The private sector can learn how to ensure that your end user is not just seen as an end user, but as a co-creator of your products and your services at every stage of your product development process. It's not just because it gives you like nice stories to tell about how you're working with the community. It also makes your products better, and it makes it easier to sell those products back to government, because you've taken a fundamentally innovative approach to how you're developing your products in a way that I think most companies don't do right now. Most companies have, again, a very transactional relationship when it comes to selling to government. So I think it's a big plus to be able to take a citizen or human-centered design approach. The other thing I was going to say on the last question is government really needs to get better about how we do contracting and procurement, which I think a lot of people here might agree with, because we're still most states are still very much stuck in this cycle where a budget is approved by General Assembly for 2 years, and so you can't really innovate and buy technology and flex and go back and forth with any kind of efficiency, because you're sort of stuck with the money that you have at the beginning of those 2 years. During the pandemic, there was a big push to having more sort of agile methods of acquiring technology. A lot of data centers, for example, now, a lot of data providers have a consumption-based model to how they provide servers. In other words, most companies, when they buy data centers or they are investing in data centers, nowadays, a lot of them pay only for what they use in terms of data. They don't buy huge bulk purchases of servers and have that be a big capital expense. They pay as they go. I think states should be able to do the same thing. But right now, the way that procurement works, it's very hard to do that in any kind of real way.
Great. How about any other thoughts? Ken, Pamela?
No, I'd have to say you're pretty much spot on. Government is obviously behind the private sector in a lot of different ways. Procurement being one of many, and I think some of the things that we've been trying to work on at our agency level are how to kind of make things a little bit easier. So we're going through our own little transformations as well. I'll give you just a little case in point. Our MOU process, when I first started here, and I've only been here a year, our MOU process with agencies and localities used to take about 6 weeks. And the reason being for these data sharing agreements was that you had multiple facets and multiple agencies involved. So even though you have one Office of the Attorney General where all this stuff comes from, it goes to an agency, goes back up through OAG, gets assigned to their lawyer talks to this lawyer, that lawyer talks to that lawyer, this one crosses the T, that one doesn't like the way the T looks like, and you go through this iterative cycle. So we got them together and all on the same page and turned a 6-week process down into a little bit less than a week. And the amendments part is a little bit quicker, but now we're looking at automatic transformation and how do we get this stuff into a pipeline view rather than sending PDFs around and doing it the way of the dinosaur. So
I think we're definitely making improvements, right?
Yes.
Well, we talked a bit about sharing data, being very open. We want to do more of that, but let's talk about the ethical considerations involved in sharing data between the public and private sector, and how can these be addressed? I'll start with Pamela. We had talked about a camera example.
Yeah, so we are just starting to really sort of document and think about how we're going to deal with all the data that we're collecting, particularly with cameras. So we have a camera attached to all of our trash collection trucks. And the reason is so that when we get calls and people say, you missed my trash, we can say, you didn't put it out, which happens a lot. But we really need, but that data just is collected. Of course, it's not just trash cans, it's cars, it's who's parked here, it's what kids are running around. So we are just now starting to really think about what that means and what we're gonna do with that. And sort of in a bigger picture, it just came out in the paper today, so I can talk about it. Our proposed budget, everybody has problems hiring police. I think it's a city across the country, really. And so we just can't keep our numbers up for our police officers. So we are taking the same amount of money and putting some of it into what we're calling a real-time crime center, which is really smart policing. And so we're putting up cameras. It's actually not as many of ours as we're making partnerships and connections with other people that have cameras. And so that brings its own set of issues about what can we do with that? How long do we save it? So we're just now embarking on sort of trying to come up with our rules around that. It's a big thing.
It's definitely a big topic. So, Karen, did you want to comment on that? The ethical considerations of all this sharing?
You hit on a very good point, Pamela, and that is the retention aspect, right? It's, especially in government, they want to hold on to everything forever, which creates a very unique set of problems regarding, how you're going to protect it for one thing, but how you're going to share it. And we all know, everybody in this room, if data has hit the end of its shelf life, right? For anything other than longitudinal use or historical use, it's really not going to be useful for any type of current outcomes or current decisions, right? But we have agencies that have an enormous amount of data just sitting there and just doing nothing with no retention policies in place to govern that. So.
Yeah, and I think, so we do have a records retention manager who's been with the city for, I think, 70 years or something. And he won't even really talk with us about what does this mean. I mean, we have the data we have this data in the portal, and he knows the rules of hard copy, right? You have to throw it away after 5 years, or these you save for 7. But we're really working on getting him to engage with us on what does that mean? Does that translate equally to the data that we have in the portal or not? So.
Yeah. And Zaki, you've done work with the federal government, so I'm sure you've had to tackle these issues. So.
Yeah, I mean, look, the golden rule when it comes to handling of data and the ethics around it, whether it's citizens in the public sector or customers in the private sector, is transparency. At the end of the day, everybody wants to know how is their data being collected and how is it being used. It doesn't matter who you are, that's always going to be your concern. So transparency on the part of government and transparency on the part of the private sector to say very clearly to its users and to its citizens, this is the data that we're collecting on you, this is what we're using it for, this is how we take care of this data. That has to be the standard practice across the board. And I think that a lot of that work is being done and has been done in the last few years here in Virginia, but it's something that tends to be ad hoc, right? There's not always a centralized statement of ethics or statement of principles around how data is being used and how it's being collected. And I think it's going to get more and more of a dicey issue because we're seeing an explosion of data being used in all kinds of exciting but also terrifying ways. I mean, ChatGPT is like a really prime example where it's so cool what ChatGPT can do, but it's also kind of scary. Like, what data sets is it using? A lot of these AI-based applications are only as good as the data that's being fed into them. And so there's a lot of concerns, especially among, traditionally underrepresented communities that have data collected on them. They often have seen that data be used against them, whether it's for profiling, whether it's for harassment. They have seen their data being used, weaponized against them, and it's sort of a true reality. And for them, they have a huge distrust of how both government and the private sector uses their data. So there's a deficit of trust there that has to be overcome. And the only way it can be overcome is through radical transparency on the part of government and the private sector.
Yeah, well, that segues into my next question, which is how can the public sector ensure that data shared with the private sector is used for the public good and not for private gain? So maybe I'll start with Pamela.
Well, I would say that that's not a concern. Any of the data that we put out is, I never get this word right, anonymized. And so we encourage people to use it. I mean, if you all use Zillow, that's all based on public records, right? Real estate is public by its very nature. So we actually, as part of our selling point to get our open data portal funded and moving, was that people could use it to innovate for businesses. And a really small scale example we gave was, I mentioned earlier that we have 311 data. So people call the city about different things. And one of the number one complaints people call about is tall weeds and grass. My neighbor's not mowing their lawn. And you can find, and the addresses are in there, not names, but you can look at addresses and you can find neighborhoods that have real problems. And if I were an enterprising person that liked to mow lawns, I would go to those neighborhoods and pass out a flyer and mow lawns. So I don't think we need to protect. We need to protect the privacy, with whatever we agree is going to be private, but I am not at all concerned that people are going to use the data to make money. That's kind of what we're all about, I think. In the end, I mean, we can argue about capitalism. I will tell you one more thing. We did have a sister city come to visit from, I believe it was Uzbekistan. It was one of those sort of Russian satellite countries. And they could not believe that we put that data out for free. They were from a government. We gave them a whole presentation on open data. And they asked me like 3 times to make sure that the translation wasn't wrong. You give this for free, you don't sell it? Because in their country, they sell their data to, to the highest bidder of entrepreneurs. So.
Sounds like we're going to get some lawn mowing flyers in our mailboxes from all the people who are here, right?
I hate to mow lawns, but somebody could do it.
Yeah, so Zaki, it sounds like you want to add something there?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the flip side to it, is this better when I talk down like this?
Yeah, you're good.
The flip side to it is, even, because when we first started the Virginia Open Data Portal, we started with low-hanging fruit, like data sets that were already publicly available. But the thing is, they were publicly available in a very technical sense. Most of the public didn't even know this data existed. And so when we suddenly put it front and center on our open data portal, a lot of people were like, whoa, where'd you get this data from? You've been collecting this stuff on us? And we're like, no, this has always been public. We're just making it easier for you to access. And so you have to account for that kind of like whiplash. One example is the dangerous dog registry that VDAC has, VDACs. I don't know if anybody's here from that agency, but it's a pretty clunky interface. And what it is, it's literally a registry of all dangerous dogs that have been reported across the state. I took that data set and I plugged it into a very rudimentary mapping tool and was able to see dangerous dogs all around me. And I was like, I didn't want this data. I'm just freaked out. And so, but you wouldn't have gotten that kind of insight, that kind of visualization from the way that data was being presented. So even if the data is technically public, when it becomes more accessible, there's a burden of responsibility, I think, on government to say, hey, this has already been public, we're making it more easily accessible, and just, again, radical transparency about where that data came from. Mm-hmm. Because there is kind of like a adjustment and shock and whiplash that can come from it.
All right.
It's that whole privacy by obscurity thing.
Yeah.
And it's definitely, I think, shell shock when people wake up and realize the amount of data about you that is out there. I'd like to say something about data stewardship as well. From our perspective, a lot of it has to be set by the data owners and the data stewards. What that data can be used for, what purposes, what controls are going to be placed on those, who it's going to be shared with, all of that stuff's got to be mapped out. That's got to be known. Otherwise, you're just throwing data over the fence to somebody just because they say they want it. And I think a lot of our agencies understand what can happen, as a result of doing that. Some of our agencies get some fairly generous federal grants. That would, money is a great motivator in that sense. So.
For sure. Well, this has been fascinating, and I'm watching the time. I want to leave some time for questions. So for our final question, I'll start with Ken. What do you think the state of public-private partnerships will look like in the next few years? If we're at the Data Summit next year, what are we talking about?
Well, if I have anything to do with it, hopefully...
I think you will.
Hopefully a lot closer knit, and some very good participation in not just events, but some of our events, some of your events. Happy hour, it doesn't matter. It's as long as we're all learning from one another, and I think that there is a huge amount that the public sector can learn from the private sector.
Awesome, thank you. And Pamela?
Kind of the same. Cross-pollination is always a good thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, both between public-private, even internally. More than one brain thinking about something is exponentially better.
Absolutely.
So.
And finally, Zaki.
Yeah, I think that it's important, as I said before, to elevate that relationship between public and private sectors from a transactional vendor-client relationship to a true partnership that's focused on solving the actual issues that citizens face. I think that also, this is a personal soapbox, but I think that government needs to break up contracts more and have more vendors and have more competition between vendors. I was in the McAuliffe administration back when Northrop Grumman basically had everything IT related, having to do with the state of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And I don't know if anybody here is from Northrop Grumman, but that was terrible. That contract should have been broken up, and I think eventually it did. But that's the reality we have to move to, where you have many competing vendors. They're coming to the table. They're doing an iterative design process, and there's an incentive for those vendors to continually improve the services and the products they're providing, and not get complacent in these long-term contracts that allow them to basically just stagnate and tread water. So I hope that is the future of the public-private relationship in the future.
Great. All right, now I'm going to turn it over to the audience. So who has questions?
All right, we'll start over here.
Hi, I was wondering if you could speak to the extent to which governments are cultivating talent, technology talent within their departments versus outsourcing everything to private partnerships.
Go ahead.
So we've started a group called Civic Lab. We used to be, a bunch of us were in different departments. Our data scientist was in budget. I was in IT. We had some other people just scattered around. We pulled them together, and one of the things we are doing is working with other departments now to train their folks. So we have something called a data certification program, and it's a pretty tough program put together by our data scientist. If you get through it, then you get a $5,000 a year stipend. So we're really encouraging. What we say is we're trying to grow our own data scientists. And we also have a group called Data Champions, which are more just mid-level folks. We meet with them every other month to just show them some tools that they should be using, like Power BI. A lot of folks are underutilizing that, and it's a pretty amazing tool. So also, the city of Norfolk, we just released our budget. We put a lot of money in there for training because we're really trying to retain our employees.
And I think Ken was excited to answer that question too,
Yeah.
so I won't forget you.
Well, yeah, I have to say that we've started probably about 2 years ago on our little journey, and there were 6 to 8 people in our agency when I started a year ago. We're pushing 30 people now, but we've had no one leave. In fact, we've had some, I'd say, incredible talent, Chris included, join our team, and it's not because you're going to get rich working for the Commonwealth of Virginia, right? It's because of the mission, and we all believe. If I didn't believe in what we were doing, just a quick story. I got a call a little over a year ago from the chief of staff after Governor Youngkin was elected, and he said, "Can you take a day off? Can you come down and can you speak with me? I have something you might be interested in." So I did, and I came down. I spoke with everyone in the administration and looked at where ODGA was on the radar and where it was going and the things that we could be doing and solving for. And of course I accepted the job, and Chief asked me, he's like, "So when can you start?" I said, "Can you give me a month?" He's like, "You got 3 weeks." So I started on April Fool's Day, as a matter of fact, of last year. And after uprooting myself and moving halfway across the country and coming into the office on April Fool's Day, I was really hoping that it wasn't all a joke. But the folks that we have in our agency are just tremendously talented and cream of the crop. And if we keep people excited about the work and it's meaningful work, they're going to stay. If you take care of them personally and professionally, they're going to stay. If you make sure that they're compensated adequately, they're going to stay. All 3 have to be present, right? And you just can't be a jerk as a boss, right?
Okay, he's not a jerk. We're good there. There was a question over here.
Thank you all for coming. When I hear public-private partnership, my brain usually interprets that as like government-business partnership. I'm curious, where does the public factor into the equation? I kind of think of how government puts out weather data, and then maybe the Weather Channel or Weather.com or Weather Underground, some other sources turn that into something useful for people to see in the public. So I'm curious if there's any other examples like that, or how you think of that.
I think Zaki?
I've always not been totally comfortable with the binary of public-private partnerships. I tend to see it as more as a triangle where you have government, you have the private sector, and then you have communities or, the end user or citizens. And to me, it's more about there being a harmonious connection between all those three groups that truly produces the best solutions that's going to help everybody. Because again, if you're not taking a human-centered or community-centered or citizen-centered approach to building both policy and technology, then what you build is not going to serve everybody that you intend to serve. So I think that there needs to be a change there where it's not seen as just companies and government. There's also the added actual public engagement, and public engagement that's not just done for the sake of doing it, public engagement that means true representation of the public, of communities in the development process and the design process. I think that that's absolutely essential.
Okay, great. Any other questions?
I think we'll take one more. Before we do, I'll come over and find you. We have some high schoolers among us. We have Code RVA students. Can we have the Code RVA students just stand up real quick? Okay, and their teacher, Awesome. All right, can we give these young folks a round of applause for coming here today? Yes. All right. Thank you. Thanks to Code RVA. We want you to come up when they come off the stage after this question, and you can get a picture with the Chief Data Officer and this wonderful, illustrious panel. You're welcome to do it. If you don't want to do it, that's fine. It's like trying to get my own kids to take a picture. I understand how that goes. Anyways, but please come up after this question if you would like a picture with the CDO and the other fine folks. So, all right, last question of the day before we go to the bar.
No pressure. Wow. So I think programs like the Aspen Institute and USDS are awesome programs at the federal level. I'm curious as to there's a mandate at the federal level that all agencies need to have a chief data officer. How quickly should we expect to start seeing the impacts of these things? I guess we maybe already have, and then from a structural standpoint, that's a pretty big deal to have a CDO at every agency. Have we considered doing that at the state level? Is that feasible?
I feel like Ken take that one.
Yeah.
Most of our agencies, if they are to the point to where they are working with data, already have a chief data officer. And right now, I can attest to at least 28 agencies right now that are part of a Commonwealth Data Trust that do have a CDO. And they're usually our first point of contact because they understand, the value that we're trying to, instill into them and the value that we're trying to draw out of them at the same time. We also engage with at the secretariat level as well as the commissioner level of all these agencies.
And Zaki, you mentioned the Aspen Institute, so I'll let you answer as well.
Well, I think that I guess your question is these changes are happening at the federal level. Can we see it kind of trickle down to the state level? And I think the answer is yes, it should be. I think the outstanding question, though, is as you start installing CDOs in all these agencies at the state level, what is their interaction with the CTOs for each agency? What is their interaction with the political folks in the governor's office? When I was working for HPE, we'd go into an agency and nobody in that agency was talking to each other, and they certainly weren't talking to the governor's office on priorities, and so there was a lot of disconnect. And I think that needs to be solved in all states. There needs to be more cohesive, more cohesion, more exchange of information between the folks that handle the data, the folks that handle the tech infrastructure, and the folks that are actually leading the government. Otherwise, you're just sort of putting CDOs for the sake of putting CDOs, and that's not helpful to anybody.
All right. Well,
And I just wanted to say again, I think that the municipal government makes the biggest difference in anybody's life. I mean, every day, potholes, trash, tall weeds and grass. And so we do have a data scientist. That's not that common. I'd be interested to hear if that's common across the Commonwealth, but I think that that's important, and that's something that you can make a difference in your own cities to say, how are you using this data to make, because all of your real estate taxes are paying for that. And so I just think it makes a huge difference for us. We've made some much smarter decisions because we are analyzing data, because we're making it public. So think about that as well.
So
We do have a data scientist. He's actually sitting in the room here. So.
we got one of those, right? But look,
In Richmond, you're saying. Okay.
So I think,
Andrew, you want to stand up and say
Let's
hi?
say our data scientist.
hi, Andrew.
See, they think you're a figment of my imagination.
No, well, hopefully you can tell from the panel we are very passionate about data and public service, and that we're driving change through the application of data to help the citizens of the Commonwealth as well as municipalities. So I want to thank this wonderful panel for all of their insightful comments, and I guess enjoy happy hour. Thank you.
Thank you.
Photo time.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for coming today. Our happy hour will begin just outside. If this is your first event and I haven't met you before, my name's Nick Surface. I'm the CEO here at rvatech. Please say hi outside. I'd love to get to know y'all. And if this is your first conference, we have a few more throughout the year. Please check our website, and we'll see you next time at an rvatech event. Thanks so much for coming.